I hadn't heard from them in years. Not a text, not a call, not even a stray email accidentally forwarded. Then, out of nowhere, an invitation arrived. A wedding invite, gold embossed and elegant, announcing the grand union of my younger brother, Adam. At first, I thought it was a mistake, maybe some cruel joke, but inside was a handwritten note, unmistakably from Adam. I miss you, Finn. I know things have been rough, but I want you here. Please. I read the note at least a dozen times, turning it over in my hands like it would reveal a hidden meaning. After everything that happened, after the way they cast me aside, now he wanted me there? Memories I tried so hard to suppress came rushing back. The nights spent wondering why I was never enough. The years of struggling while they lavished Adam with everything he wanted. The final moment when I walked away, promising myself I was done with them forever. But here was the invitation, daring me to reconsider. I shouldn't have even entertained the idea. I had built a life without them. A thriving event business, a place of my own, peace I had never known before. And yet, a small, insidious part of me wanted to believe Adam was sincere, that he wasn't just another pawn in my father's game. So, against my better judgment, I RSVP'd yes. I didn't plan to go empty-handed. Despite everything, I wanted to do something for Adam. My company specialized in high-end event planning, and I offered to provide services at a steep discount. A gift, if you will. The response? A polite but firm rejection. Thank you, Finn, but Dad already has everything taken care of. A rejection wrapped in sugar, but a rejection nonetheless. That should have been my first warning. Still, I told myself I was doing this for Adam. Not for them. Certainly not for my father or his wife, Vivian, who had spent years making it clear I was nothing more than an unwanted remnant of his past life. On the day of the wedding, I arrived early. The venue was breathtaking. Sprawling gardens, a ballroom dripping in crystal chandeliers, everything meticulously curated for the perfect evening. I should have known something was off when I saw the seating chart. Table 16. Far from the head table, from immediate family, from anyone who actually mattered. I was tucked away with distant relatives and plus ones who barely knew the groom's name. It was a message. A clear one. You don't belong here. Fine. If that's how they wanted to play it, I could handle a few hours of discomfort. I reminded myself why I came, for Adam. Then my father approached. He had a glass of whiskey in hand, eyes sharp despite the drink. He stopped at my table, looked me over, and scoffed. You shouldn't have come. I set my glass down slowly. I was invited. Out of pity, he sneered. You're an embarrassment, Finn. Always have been. You don't belong in this family, and you sure as hell don't belong here. The words hit like a punch to the gut, but I refused to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. I could have left then and there. Should have, maybe. But as I sat there, watching the celebration unfold, an unexpected realization hit me. The catering staff, the decorators, the lighting crew, every single one of them worked for me. They had hired my company, and they had no idea. I leaned back, exhaling slowly, as an idea formed in my mind. If they didn't want me here, they sure as hell didn't deserve my services. The music swelled as the newlyweds made their way into the reception hall, the crowd erupting into cheers. I stayed seated at my distant table, swirling the drink in my hand, my father's words still ringing in my ears. An embarrassment, a mistake, an outsider. He thought he could humiliate me and still reap the benefits of my work? Not tonight. I pulled out my phone and sent a single text to my operations manager. Terminate services. Immediately. The response was swift. Understood. Initiating withdrawal. The beauty of running a high-end event company was that everything operated seamlessly. From the floral arrangements to the lighting, the entire experience was designed to be a dream. Until I decided to end it. I sat back and watched. The first signs were subtle. The lighting crew began shutting down the decorative uplights, leaving parts of the room in awkward, uneven darkness. The floral arrangements, so carefully placed, were quietly removed one by one. The catering staff, once fluid and graceful, started clearing tables instead of serving. Guests began to notice. Whispered confusion turned into murmurs of concern. A waiter carrying a tray of champagne abruptly turned and walked away, leaving guests mid-reach. And then the real chaos began. Vivian, my father's ever-perfect wife, was the first to react. She stormed toward the event coordinator, who, unbeknownst to her, reported directly to me. "What the hell is going on?" she demanded, voice laced with venom. The coordinator remained professional, hands clasped in front of her. "Per the terms of our contract, we are terminating services effective immediately." Vivian's nostrils flared. What contract? She was seconds away from an explosion when the coordinator, calm as ever, gestured toward me. "You may take it up with our owner, Finn Calloway." Vivian's head snapped in my direction. I met her gaze with a slow, measured smile. Her confusion turned to horror. She spun on her heel, cutting through the murmuring crowd, her heels clicking against the marble floors like gunshots. "You!" she seethed when she reached me. "This is your doing?" I finished my drink and stood, adjusting my suit. "That's right." Her hands balled into fists. "You cannot do this. This is Adam's wedding. You will ruin everything." I shrugged. "I'm simply following protocol. The contract states that any hostility or disrespect toward management results in immediate termination of services. And, well, I was told I don't belong here." Her face twisted into something between fury and panic. "You spiteful little—" "Careful," I warned, voice low. "Wouldn't want to say something that might escalate things further, would we?" Behind her, my father approached, his face red with rage. He was already swaying from one too many drinks, but the look in his eyes was sober, angry, and calculated. "Undo this," he growled. "Now." I shook my head. "No." A hush fell over the surrounding guests. They were watching now, realizing something far bigger was happening. "You miserable excuse for a son," he spat. "You couldn't just show up and behave? Had to make this about you, didn't you?" I let his words hang in the air for a moment before responding. "No, Dad. You made this about me the second you opened your mouth." At that, the final string holding the event together snapped. The chandeliers still hung from the ceiling, but the grand wedding had transformed into a hollow, crumbling spectacle. The tables were stripped, the decor removed, and the catering halted. Guests shuffled in confusion, their perfectly curated evening unraveling before their eyes. And in the center of it all, my father and Vivian stood in silence, their fury impotent, their power gone. Because tonight wasn't theirs anymore. It was mine. Adam finally noticed the growing tension. He had been wrapped up in the celebrations, dancing with his new wife, laughing with guests, completely unaware that his wedding was unraveling piece by piece. But now, as he turned toward the commotion, he saw it. The missing flowers, the darkened lights, the caterers abandoning their stations, and worst of all, our father and Vivian locked in a furious standoff with me. His brow furrowed in confusion before realization dawned. He pushed through the crowd, coming to a halt beside them. "What's going on?" His voice was cautious, hesitant. Vivian was practically vibrating with rage. "Your brother is sabotaging your wedding," she spat, pointing an accusatory finger at me as if I had personally set the venue on fire. Adam's gaze snapped to me. "Finn?" I met his eyes, calm and composed. "I invoked a clause in my company's contract. The event is over." His expression flickered between disbelief and anger. "What? Why?" I tilted my head slightly. "You really don't know?" Vivian jumped in before he could answer. "Because he's bitter and pathetic and couldn't stand to see you happy." I exhaled a quiet laugh. "Try again." Adam's voice was sharper now. "Then tell me, what the hell is this about?" I met his gaze head-on, keeping my voice even. "Your father called me an embarrassment. Said I shouldn't be here. That I wasn't part of this family." Vivian, of course, made sure to throw in her usual insults. They made it clear I wasn't welcome, so I took them at their word. I spread my arms slightly. "You can't expect me to provide services for people who treat me like garbage. That's bad business." Adam's mouth opened and closed, searching for words. He turned to our father. "Tell me he's lying." Our father's jaw was tight, his nostrils flaring as he glared at me. He didn't deny it. Adam's hands curled into fists, You humiliated him? At my wedding? Our father scoffed. Don't be dramatic. This isn't about him. He should have never been here in the first place. Adam recoiled as if he'd been slapped. Are you serious? Vivian was still fuming. It doesn't matter now. The damage is done. Finn needs to fix this, immediately. I smirked. You don't get to demand anything from me. She turned to Adam, trying to compose herself. Tell him to undo this. Adam hesitated. His eyes flickered back to me, then around the room. At the growing confusion, the murmuring guests, his wife's worried expression. He looked at me again, searching, trying to read me. I could see the war inside him. The years of favoritism, of always being put first while I was left behind. He wasn't blind to it. He just never had to care. But now, he had to make a choice. And he knew it. Finn, he exhaled, running a hand through his hair. I don't know if this can be undone, but... No, I cut him off. He flinched. This isn't something you fix, Adam. It's a consequence, I said, my voice measured. They pushed me out years ago, and tonight, they made it very clear I was still nothing to them. They expected me to just sit there and take it. To give them my work, my time, my resources while they laughed in my face. I shook my head. Not anymore. Vivian turned on me with venom. You just had to make a scene, didn't you? I let out a short breath. Funny. I wasn't the one who started shouting first. Adam pinched the bridge of his nose. The weight of the situation was finally sinking in. The wedding was wrecked. There was no salvaging it. I turned toward him. I didn't come here to ruin your day, Adam. I came because I thought, hoped, maybe you meant it when you reached out. I held his gaze. But this is exactly why I left. His lips parted, but no words came out. The damage was done. I took one last look at my father and Vivian. Our father's face was twisted in rage, but beneath it, I saw something else. Helplessness. For the first time, he had no power, and I had all of it. I turned on my heel and walked away. Let them clean up their own mess. I stepped outside, inhaling the crisp night air, letting it cool the fire still burning in my chest. Inside, I could still hear the rising murmur of voices, the frantic shuffling of staff packing up equipment, and Vivian's shrill, panicked voice demanding someone fix this disaster. I kept walking. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me hesitate. The valet recognized me immediately and rushed to retrieve my car. I stood by the curb, hands in my pockets, staring up at the glittering venue that had, minutes ago, been a pristine backdrop for a perfect evening. Now, a hollow shell of its former grandeur, stripped of its beauty, exposed for what it truly was, a place where I had never belonged. A sharp voice behind me pulled me from my thoughts. Finn. I closed my eyes briefly before turning. Adam. His tie was loosened, his once perfectly styled hair now disheveled, and his expression was torn between anger and something else. Regret, maybe. He stalked toward me, his steps hurried, as if afraid I'd disappear before he got the words out. He stopped, exhaling sharply. You didn't have to do this. I arched a brow. Didn't I? Adam ran a hand through his hair, exasperated. You humiliated them. I let out a dry laugh. They humiliated me. Or did you miss that part? His jaw clenched. I know Dad said things he shouldn't have, but... I scoffed. That's your defense? He said things he shouldn't have? He hesitated. I stepped closer, voice quieter now. Adam, I know you. You might not have ever stood up for me, but you're not blind. You knew what they were like, what they did, and you let it happen. He swallowed, looking away. They treated me like I was nothing, I continued, my voice steady, even, and you let them. His fingers curled into fists. I didn't want to lose you, he admitted, his voice softer, raw. I stared at him for a long moment. Then why didn't you fight for me? His face twisted with something. Guilt, shame. I shook my head, stepping back. You don't get to act like the victim here, Adam. He looked pained. You could have talked to me. I exhaled, shaking my head. I shouldn't have to. His shoulders slumped. So, that's it? You're just walking away? I met his gaze, unwavering. I already did. Years ago. You just didn't notice. The valet pulled up in my car, stepping out and handing me the keys. I took them without looking away from Adam. For a moment, he looked like he wanted to say something, to fix something, but he didn't. And neither did I. I slid into the driver's seat, shutting the door with a finality that felt heavier than it should have. As I pulled away from the venue, the last thing I saw in my rearview mirror was Adam standing there, alone, watching me go. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. The next morning, I woke to a flood of missed calls and unread messages. My phone screen was lit up with names I hadn't seen in years, relatives, old family friends, even some wedding guests. But the most persistent notifications came from two sources, Vivian and my father. I swiped through the messages, scanning their desperate, furious attempts to regain control over the situation. Vivian: you selfish, vindictive little brat. Do you have any idea what you've done? Dad, fix this now. I don't care what it takes. Vivian: you embarrassed this family. You humiliated Adam and ruined his wedding. You will pay for this. Dad: you want war, Finn? You've got it. I sighed, rubbing my temple. The dramatics were expected, but still exhausting. Then I saw a message from Adam. Unlike the others, it wasn't laced with accusations or anger. It was just 3 words. Can we talk? I stared at the screen for a long moment before tossing the phone onto the couch. No, I wasn't ready to talk. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Instead, I focused on what mattered, my business, my future. By noon, my work email had a surprising development. Amongst the usual inquiries and ongoing projects, I found something unexpected, an influx of new client requests. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Then I opened the emails. I was at the wedding last night. You and your team handled everything with such professionalism despite the circumstances. I'd love to discuss hiring your company for an event I'm planning. Heard about what happened. Honestly, good for you. People need to be held accountable for how they treat others. Let's talk business. One after another, similar messages poured in. What should have been a PR nightmare had turned into an unintentional marketing boost. People weren't siding with my father or Vivian. They saw through them. They saw how I had been treated, and instead of ruining my reputation, it had strengthened it. I exhaled slowly, leaning back in my chair. So this was how it felt to win. Then, just as I was about to move on with my day, another message came through, one that made me pause. From Adam: I need you to know something. I didn't realize what they were doing to you until last night. I should have. I should have seen it sooner. I don't expect forgiveness, but I don't want to lose you. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. I read the message twice, my grip tightening around my phone. And for the first time since this whole mess began, I hesitated. Maybe this wasn't over after all. Days passed, and I ignored Adam's message. Not out of malice, but because I wasn't sure how to respond. Could I trust him? Or was this just another attempt to pull me back into a family that had never truly wanted me? I buried myself in work, setting up new contracts, meeting with clients, ensuring my team knew how much I appreciated them. The fallout from the wedding had, somehow, turned into the best advertising my company had ever received. It was ironic. Vivian had spent years belittling my business, yet it was now thriving because of her own arrogance. Then, a week later, I got another message from Adam. I get why you're ignoring me, but I need to talk to you. In person. Please. I sighed, staring at the message. I had half a mind to ignore it again, but something about it felt different. So, against my better judgment, I sent a reply. Fine. 1 hour. Westwood Cafe. The cafe was quiet when I arrived. A few patrons sat at their tables, absorbed in their laptops or quiet conversations. I spotted Adam immediately. He looked different, tired, tense, like he hadn't been sleeping well. Good. He stood when he saw me, but I didn't give him the chance to start with pleasantries. I slid into the chair across from him and folded my arms. Talk. Adam hesitated, then exhaled. I owe you an apology. I arched a brow. For what, exactly? For all of it, he said, rubbing a hand over his face. For never standing up for you. For letting them treat you like an outsider. for not seeing how messed up it all was until it was too late. I said nothing. He sighed, looking down at his hands. After you left that night, everything fell apart. Dad and Vivian tried to act like it was your fault, but people started questioning things. The guests noticed. Some even asked me why you would do something like that. And the more I tried to explain it, the more I realized. I had no good answer. Because the truth is, they pushed you out. They made you into an outsider. I clenched my jaw, staring at him. I should have seen it sooner, he admitted, shaking his head. I should have done something sooner. Yeah, I said, voice cold. You should have. Silence stretched between us. I don't expect you to forgive me, Adam said finally, but I want to fix this. If there's even a chance. There's not. My voice was quiet but firm. Adam flinched. I leaned forward slightly. Do you know how many nights I spent wondering why I wasn't good enough? Why you gotta be the one they loved while I was just tolerated? Do you know how hard I worked to prove that I was worthy of being their son, only to realize I was wasting my time? Adam swallowed hard, his hands curling into fists on the table. I don't need their love anymore, and I don't need your guilt. I exhaled sharply. You might just be realizing the truth, Adam, but I've lived with it my entire life, and I won't go back. His face crumpled for just a second before he masked it. He nodded slowly, accepting what I was saying even if he hated it. I understand, he murmured. I pushed my chair back and stood. Good. I hesitated for just a second, staring at him. This brother I once would have done anything for, now just another person in my past. Then, without another word, I walked out of the cafe. This time, I wasn't looking back. The wind was sharp as I stepped outside, but I barely felt it. My heart wasn't racing. My hands weren't shaking. There was no lingering doubt, no regret, just silence. For the first time in years, I felt like I had finally closed the door on that part of my life. I got into my car and sat for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, staring at the cafe through the rearview mirror. Adam was still inside, head bowed, shoulders slumped. He looked like he wanted to chase after me, to say something more. But I knew he wouldn't. He finally understood. As I pulled away from the curb, my phone buzzed on the passenger seat. Another flood of messages, most of which I had no interest in answering. Except for one. A client inquiry. A big one. I opened it at a red light, scanning the message quickly. I heard about what happened at the wedding. Your team handled everything with grace and professionalism despite the circumstances. I'd love to work with you for an upcoming gala. Let's talk. I exhaled a short laugh. Of course. The chaos my father and Vivian had tried to use to destroy me had done the opposite. It had solidified my reputation, not just as an event planner, but as someone who knew his worth. I typed a quick reply. Happy to discuss. Let's set up a time. When I reached my apartment, I leaned against the door for a long moment, letting the stillness wash over me. No yelling. No passive-aggressive insults. No more wondering if I'd ever be good enough. I was free. The next day, a final email came through from my father. I didn't open it. Instead, I marked it as read and archived it. That chapter was over. I had a life to live, a business to grow, and for the first time, I wasn't doing it to prove anything to anyone. I was doing it for me, and that was more than enough. Weeks passed, and life moved on. The wedding fiasco became nothing more than a memory, a turning point that had solidified what I had always known. Walking away had been the right choice. Business was booming. The publicity from the wedding disaster had spread like wildfire in the industry. More clients reached out, impressed not just by my company's professionalism, but by the sheer fact that I had the backbone to stand my ground in a business where people were often expected to swallow their pride. It was ironic, really. My father and Vivian had spent years belittling me, convinced that I would always struggle. But in their attempt to humiliate me one last time, they had handed me the greatest gift of all, undeniable proof that I didn't need them. I was doing better than ever. And then, out of nowhere, an envelope arrived at my office. There was no return address, but I recognized the handwriting immediately. Claire. I stared at it for a long moment, debating whether to open it. The last time I had seen her, she had sided with them. She had blamed me for the wedding disaster, unable or unwilling, to see that her own family had been the ones to push me to that breaking point. What could she possibly want now? Finally, curiosity won. I slid my finger under the flap, pulled out the letter, and unfolded it. Finn, I don't know if you'll ever forgive me, and I don't know if I even deserve it, but I need to say this. I was wrong. About you. About them. About everything. I spent years pretending not to see how they treated you because it was easier that way. Because standing up to Dad and Vivian would have meant losing everything they gave me, and I wasn't strong enough to risk that. But after the wedding, I saw it. Really saw it. The way Dad looked at you. The way Vivian spat venom at you like you were nothing. And the way you stood there, refusing to let them break you. You were right to walk away. I should have done it too. I don't expect you to let me back into your life. But if you ever do, I'd like a chance to prove I'm not like them. I miss you, Claire. I read the letter twice, and then I set it down, staring at it, waiting for some kind of emotion to hit me. Anger? Regret? Hope? But all I felt was peace. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt. I wasn't even relieved that she had finally admitted the truth, because I didn't need her apology. I had already moved on. I tucked the letter away in my desk. I didn't throw it out, but I didn't rush to respond, either. Maybe one day, I'd be ready to talk to Claire again. Maybe I wouldn't. But that choice was mine now. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for someone else to decide if I was worthy of being part of their world. I had built my own, and that was enough. Months passed. The wedding debacle faded from gossip circles, replaced by newer scandals and fresher family dramas. I kept moving forward, growing my business, expanding my network, and finally enjoying the life I had built for myself. One that had nothing to do with my father, Vivian, or the past they had tried to keep me trapped in. Claire's letter remained tucked away in my desk, unopened since the day I first read it. I thought about it sometimes, but never with urgency. It was there if I ever wanted to revisit it. But for now, I didn't. Then, one evening, my phone buzzed with a message that made my stomach tighten. Claire, I left them. I stared at the words for a long time. Then, before I could overthink it, I typed back, "Me, what happened?" The response came almost instantly. "Claire, can we meet?" I hesitated. I had promised myself I was done with this chapter of my life. But something about her message felt different, urgent. I sighed and ran a hand through my hair. "Me, same cafe as last time. 7 p.m. She was already there when I arrived, sitting at the same table, but she looked different. Gone was the polished, poised woman who had once stood at our father's side without question. She looked tired. When she saw me, she gave a small, hesitant smile. "Hey." I slid into the seat across from her. "Hey." For a few moments, we just sat there, neither of us speaking. Finally, she exhaled and broke the silence. "I should have done this sooner," she admitted, shaking her head. "But I was afraid. Afraid of losing them. Afraid of losing everything they gave me." She looked up, and for the first time, I saw something raw in her expression. Regret. "But I lost you instead," she said quietly. I leaned back in my chair, folding my arms. "And what changed?" She let out a breath. "After the wedding, things got worse. Dad was furious. Not just at you, but at me. He blamed me for inviting you. Said I let you ruin everything." Her jaw tightened. "Vivian was just as bad. It wasn't enough that you were gone. They wanted me to hate you, too. And I think they could tell I didn't." I tilted my head. "So they turned on you?" She gave a humorless laugh. "Yeah. Slowly, at first. Little jabs, backhanded comments. Then bigger things. They started pulling back their support, making it clear that if I wasn't fully theirs, I was nothing." She exhaled sharply. "And I realized that's how they've always worked. It wasn't just you. It was anyone who didn't play by their rules." I nodded slowly. "So you finally saw them for who they are." "I did," she admitted. "And once I did, I couldn't unsee it. So I left. Cut ties. Packed my bags and walked away." I studied her carefully. "And now what?" She hesitated. "I don't know. I wanted to see you. To tell you that I get it now. To tell you I'm sorry. I didn't say anything right away. Not because I didn't believe her, but because I knew what it had cost her to say it. And I knew what came next. She was waiting to see if I'd let her back in. I took a slow breath, then spoke. I'm glad you got out, Claire. I meant it. I really did. But I don't know if we can go back to how things were. Her expression faltered, but she nodded. I understand. I leaned forward slightly. That doesn't mean I don't care about you. It just means this isn't something we fix overnight. A small, hopeful smile touched her lips. Then can we start small? I considered it. Then, finally, I nodded. Yeah, we can start small. And for the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't alone anymore. Claire let out a small, relieved breath, as if she'd been bracing for rejection. I could still see the guilt in her eyes, the weight of her choices hanging heavy on her shoulders. But there was something else there, too. Something I hadn't seen in a long time. Determination. She wasn't just here to apologize. She was here because she was finally ready to change. I don't expect you to trust me overnight, she admitted, fiddling with the rim of her coffee cup. I didn't want to wait any longer to tell you the truth. I nodded slowly, my fingers tapping against the table. So what now? She let out a short, uncertain laugh. Honestly, I have no idea. I left without a plan. I don't have a place to stay, and I sure as hell don't have their money to fall back on anymore. She looked up at me. But I do know one thing. I'm done with them. For good. I searched her face, looking for any sign of hesitation, any lingering ties to the people who had tried to break me for so many years. But she was telling the truth. She had finally let go. I'm proud of you, I said simply. Claire's eyes widened slightly, as if she hadn't expected that. You are? I nodded. It's not easy, walking away. I know that better than anyone. I took a deep breath. And if you're really serious about starting over, I can help. She blinked, taken aback. You would. I shrugged. It doesn't mean we pretend the past didn't happen. But if you're willing to do the work, then yeah, I'll be here. Her hands clenched around her coffee cup, her shoulders shaking slightly. Thank you, Finn, she whispered. You don't know what that means to me. For the first time in a long time, I felt something shift between us. Something real. Something worth rebuilding. Outside, the city lights flickered, and for the first time in years, I wasn't looking back at what I had lost. I was looking forward. And this time, I wasn't alone. Weeks passed, and slowly, carefully, Claire and I started to rebuild. It wasn't easy. At first, our conversations were strained, filled with long pauses and awkward attempts to bridge the years of silence. But little by little, we found a rhythm. She didn't ask for much, just time, just patience, and for the first time, I saw the version of Claire that might have existed if our father and Vivian hadn't molded her into their perfect golden child. She moved into a small apartment, got a job, started figuring things out on her own for the first time in her life. It wasn't glamorous. She wasn't handed anything, but she was finally free, and I was proud of her. She never once asked me for money or a shortcut, never once tried to lean on my success as an easy way out. She was determined to stand on her own, and that, more than anything, made me believe she was serious about changing. One night, we sat on the balcony of her tiny studio apartment, eating takeout straight from the containers, watching the city lights flicker against the dark sky. She nudged her chopsticks at me. So, are we ever going to talk about the wedding? Or is that just going to be one of those things we pretend never happened? I snorted. Oh, it definitely happened. She laughed, shaking her head. I still can't believe you did that. I smirked. Believe it. Claire grew quiet, staring out at the skyline. I should have defended you, she said after a moment. That night, before it got that far, I didn't respond right away. I should have too, she continued. Years ago. She swallowed. I spent so long pretending not to see what they were doing to you. And by the time I finally did see it, I thought it was too late. I set down my food, watching her. You saw it that night? She nodded. The way Dad talked to you. The way Vivian looked at you like you weren't even human. It was so normal to them. She exhaled, shaking her head. But it wasn't normal. And I knew that. Her voice broke for a second before she steadied herself. I just wasn't brave enough to do anything about it. I let the silence settle between us before finally saying, "You are now." She turned to me, eyes wide. I shrugged. "It's not about what you should have done back then. It's about what you do now." She gave me a small, uncertain smile. "And what if I mess up?" I leaned back against my chair. "Then you fix it." She let out a breath, nodding. "Okay." We sat there for a long time, the city buzzing below us, neither of us speaking. And for the first time, it didn't feel awkward. It felt like home. Months passed, and our relationship continued to mend, piece by piece. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments when the past felt too heavy, when old wounds threatened to pull us back into silence. But we kept showing up for each other. Claire found a new rhythm in her life. She got a better job, started making real friends outside of the world our father and Vivian had crafted for her. She was learning, growing, and, for the first time, choosing her own path instead of following one that had been forced on her. Then, one evening, she showed up at my office unannounced, her face paler than usual, a folder clutched tightly in her hands. "I need you to see this," she said, voice shaking. I frowned, standing up from my desk as she placed the folder down in front of me. "What is it?" She hesitated, then opened it. Inside were financial statements, bank records, payments, and my father's name was all over them. I flipped through the pages, my pulse picking up speed. There were transactions dating back years, large sums of money being moved, accounts being drained, and worst of all, what looked like an entire shell company under Claire's name. I looked up at her, stunned. "What the hell is this?" Her hands were clenched into fists. "Dad's been moving money illegally, and he's been using me as a front." My breath caught. "Claire." She shook her head. "I didn't know, Finn. I swear to God I didn't. I found these after I left. I started going through old accounts, trying to close things in my name, and that's when I saw it. I was a legal officer in a company I didn't even know existed." She swallowed hard. "If this gets out, I could go to jail for something I had nothing to do with." I ran a hand down my face, trying to process. Our father wasn't just cruel. He was a criminal. Claire looked at me, eyes pleading. I don't know what to do. I exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of what she was asking. There was only one real option. We go to the authorities. Claire's face twisted in fear.
"But—"
"No buts," I said firmly. "This isn't just about getting away from him. It's about making sure he can't hurt anyone else." She swallowed hard, her hands shaking as she closed the folder. "He's going to come after me." I met her gaze, my voice steady. "Not if I get to him first." Claire took a deep breath, nodding. "Okay." And just like that, we were no longer just escaping our father's shadow. We were about to burn it to the ground. The next few days were a blur of tense conversations, legal consultations, and carefully planned steps. Claire and I didn't rush into anything. This wasn't just about cutting ties anymore. It was about dismantling the empire our father had built, brick by fraudulent brick. She was terrified, and I didn't blame her. Going up against a man like our father wasn't just dangerous. It was unpredictable. He had spent his whole life manipulating, controlling, and making sure that no one ever had enough power to challenge him. But now he had made a mistake. He had underestimated Claire. We met with a lawyer first, laying everything out in excruciating detail. Every account, every transfer, every document that tied her name to something she had never even known about. The lawyer's expression hardened the further he read. "This isn't just fraud," he said finally, placing the papers down. "This is serious financial crime. Your father could be looking at years in prison." Claire swallowed hard. "And what about me?" The lawyer gave her a long look. "That depends. If you cooperate with an investigation, provide everything you have, and make it clear that you were unknowingly used as a front, you could walk away without charges." "But only if I turn against him," she said quietly. The lawyer nodded. "Yes." I looked at Claire. "He would have let you take the fall for this." She let out a shaky breath. "I know." And in that moment, I saw something shift in her. A new resolve. For years, she had justified his actions, minimized them, found ways to pretend that his control wasn't as suffocating as it was. But now she saw him for exactly what he was. A monster. And we were finally ready to take him down. The hardest part came next. Going to the authorities. Claire had to sit through hours of interviews, detailing how she had discovered the financial discrepancies, how she had been unknowingly listed as an officer in shell companies, how our father had used her name and identity to move money without her knowledge. She was shaking when we left the office, her grip tight around her purse as we walked to my car. "Do you think he knows yet?" she whispered. I exhaled. "If he doesn't, he will soon." And sure enough, the next morning, Claire's phone rang. "Dad." We were at my apartment when it happened. Claire paled at the sight of his name flashing across the screen. Her fingers trembled as she held the phone, her knuckles white. I reached across the table and pressed the answer button for her, putting the call on speaker. Silence. Then, his voice, sharp and controlled. "Claire." She swallowed. "Dad, you've made a very, very stupid mistake." My jaw clenched. Claire took a breath, but her voice didn't waver. "No, you did." A pause. Then a low, bitter chuckle. "I underestimated you," he admitted. "I thought you were smart enough to know where your loyalty lies." "My loyalty?" she repeated, her voice growing stronger. "You stole from me. You used me." His voice darkened. "I protected you." "No," she snapped. "You controlled me. And I'm done." Silence. Then his tone dropped into something colder. "You don't know what you've started, Claire." My patience snapped. "No, you don't." The silence stretched. He hadn't expected me to be on the call. "This is going to ruin you, Finn," he said finally, his voice edged with rage. "You think you've won? You think this will end with me behind bars while you walk away untouched?" He laughed darkly. "You've never been that lucky." I smirked, even though he couldn't see it. "I don't need luck. I have evidence." He was silent again, but I could hear the barely contained fury in his breath. "You're making a mistake," he warned. I leaned forward. "No, Dad. You did. And now, you're finally going to pay for it." Claire exhaled sharply, gripping the edge of the table. The call went dead. She met my gaze, eyes wide with a mixture of relief and lingering fear. "Do you think he'll try something?" I nodded. "Definitely." And that was exactly why we were ready for him. Because for the first time, he was the one on the losing side. 2 days later, it started. Our father wasn't the type to go down quietly. He was too prideful, too paranoid, too obsessed with control. The moment he realized Claire wasn't bluffing, that we had handed over enough evidence to put him away for years, he did exactly what we expected him to do. He fought back. First came the threats. Claire received an untraceable email. "Retract everything, and this goes away. Keep pushing, and you'll regret it." She showed it to me without hesitation. I forwarded it to our lawyer, who sent it straight to the authorities. Then came the calls, from family members, from old business associates, even from people we barely knew. They all had the same message. "He's your father. Are you really going to do this to him? You have no idea what kind of mess you're walking into. Think about what you're doing. This could ruin you too." But Claire didn't waver. Not this time. The final move was his most desperate, legal threats. He had his lawyers draft up nonsense lawsuits, claiming Claire had stolen from him, that she had committed fraud, that I had coerced her into all of this out of some long-harbored grudge. The intimidation tactics might have worked years ago. Not anymore. Because we had something he didn't. The truth. The authorities weren't buying his games. The financial records spoke for themselves. And then, just when I thought I had seen every trick up his sleeve, he tried to run. The night before the official charges were set to be filed, I got a call from our lawyer. "He's trying to leave the country," she said, straight to the point. "Booked a flight under an alias, but we flagged it." I cursed under my breath. "And the authorities are already on it." Claire, who had been sitting on my couch, listening in, sat up straight. "Is he actually going to be arrested?" Our lawyer exhaled. "Yes. It's just a matter of time." It happened the next morning. The moment I saw the news alert on my phone, I knew it was real. Business tycoon Richard Calloway arrested in attempted fraud and money laundering case. Claire stood behind me, reading the headline over my shoulder. She let out a shaky breath, covering her mouth with her hands. "It's over," she whispered. I turned to her. Yeah, I said. It is. And for the first time, I actually believed it. The trial was inevitable. Dad had the best lawyers money could buy, but the case against him was airtight. Claire's testimony was damning, the financial records irrefutable, and the prosecution had more than enough to bury him. In the end, he took a plea deal. 10 years behind bars. I didn't go to the sentencing. Neither did Claire. But we watched the news that day. When the cameras caught a glimpse of him being led into court, handcuffed and seething, Claire turned to me. He always acted like he was untouchable, she murmured. I nodded. Not anymore. She exhaled. Do you think he'll ever try to come back? After he gets out? I thought about it for a moment, and then I shook my head. No, because we weren't the same people we had been before. We weren't scared of him anymore, and we never would be again. Months later, life had fully moved on. Claire had rebuilt from the ground up. She had her own place, a new job, and for the first time in her life, true independence. My business was thriving. The wedding fiasco had turned into an industry legend, and clients trusted me now more than ever. But more than that, I had something else. Peace. No more looking over my shoulder. No more waiting for the past to pull me back in. One night, as Claire and I sat on my rooftop terrace, overlooking the city, she nudged me. You know, she said, if someone told me a year ago that this is where we'd be, I wouldn't have believed them. I smirked. Yeah, me neither. She smiled. But I'm glad we're here. I met her gaze, nodding. Me too. And just like that, it was done. The past was behind us. And the future? Ours to write. Time passed. Seasons changed. And for the first time in years, there was no weight dragging me down. Our father was gone. Locked away, no longer a looming shadow over our lives. The family name, once a symbol of power and intimidation, had been reduced to a scandal that faded from public interest as quickly as it had exploded. Claire and I had survived it. We had won. But even victory didn't mean everything was easy. There were days when Claire still flinched at unknown numbers calling her phone, expecting another remnant of our father's past to come clawing at her. There were moments when I caught myself instinctively bracing for the next fight, even when there was none. Healing wasn't instant, but it was happening. Claire had started therapy. She said it helped her unravel the years of conditioning, the twisted ways our father had taught her to see the world, to see me. She told me once, over coffee, that she barely recognized the version of herself from before. I don't know how you did it, she admitted. How you walked away when you did. I shrugged. I didn't have a choice. She shook her head. No, you did. You chose to save yourself. She met my gaze. And now I get why. I didn't respond, just reached for my drink. Because the truth was, I hadn't walked away because I was strong. I had walked away because I had nothing left to lose. But now? Now I had a life worth protecting. One evening, months later, I got a call from an unknown number. Normally, I ignored them. But something made me answer. A familiar voice came through the line. You really thought I'd disappear that easily? I didn't move, my grip tightening on the phone. It was him, my father. Still in prison, but still him. I let out a slow breath. You must be really bored. He chuckled darkly. Oh, I've had plenty of time to think. I stayed silent, waiting. You think you've won, Finn? His voice was calm, too calm. That you and Claire are free? That everything you built can't be touched? I exhaled, shaking my head. You really don't get it, do you? I made you, he snapped suddenly, his composure slipping for the first time. You are nothing without me. I smiled to myself. There it was. The desperation. The proof that, even locked away, he still couldn't stand that he had lost. I leaned back in my chair, staring out at the skyline. That's where you're wrong. Silence. Then, a low, bitter laugh. You're just like me, Finn. I shook my head. No, I never was. And then, without another word, I ended the call, blocked the number. And just like that, I erased him from my life for the final time. A year passed. Claire and I didn't talk about him anymore. Not because we were ignoring what happened, but because we no longer needed to. She was thriving. I was thriving. And together, We had rewritten our story. One where we weren't the victims. One where we won. And that, in the end, was all that mattered.